we've been a little bit confused, Jim, as to where you are on the tunnel. And I asked your spokesperson when he was in Seattle a few weeks ago to give me some illumination, and he sent me this. The congressman doesn't want to step on anyone else's jurisdiction and add an unnecessary voice to an already loud and contentious debate. Why isn't your voice in this debate? You're someone who people listen to. You're a citizen of Seattle. More than that, you're Seattle's representative in D.C. We, at least, would like to know where you are on the tunnel and what you think should be done.
Well, let me give you how I've operated before on Sound Transit. When I went to Congress, one of my three commercials was about the need for a transit system in this country. That's 1988. We formed a committee, a tri-county committee. It took 5 years to get that through the legislature. Ultimately, then they started drawing the lines. If you had given me a pencil and said, Jim McDermott, what's your line? My line would have been from the University of Washington in Tacoma through the campus here and up to Bothell. I would have made a single spine that would have connected it, and that's what I would have done. But this is a democracy where you have to listen to the people. And all those fights we had about whether it would go down Martin Luther King Way or whether it would go down Rainier, and would it be above ground or underground or on this level, all those things, the people have a right to participate in. And no single person from Washington, D.C. is going to say, this is the way it's going to be. This is not a dictatorship. So you have to allow that process. The same is true with this issue of whether we have a tunnel or whether you put it on the ground or whether you build one up in the air. And there have been important people who've gotten out there on all this stuff, and we still haven't started it.
You were talking about the question of democracy and letting the people decide, but the people have voted on this issue. In 2007, they voted on it. People have been talking about this.
They voted for no tunnel and for...
Exactly. So there was a bit of a lack of clarity, but they didn't vote for the tunnel, which is what's now happening. How did you vote in that election?
I don't remember how I did. It didn't make any difference to me which way you did it. I think the city, I tell you what I really think. I like the idea of having access to the water. I was raised in Chicago, and I know Grant Park, and I know the waterfront in the city. And for us not to have access to the waterfront is really a loss to the civic ambiance of this city.
Well, so that begins to narrow it down. You're for taking down the viaduct.
Yeah.
So either we're talking about
God's
surface...
going to take it down if we don't.
Right. So either we're talking about surface transit or the tunnel from your perspective. Mm-hmm. You were talking about sound transit before. Your spokesman told me you always prefer mass transit to just providing more ways to move cars around.
And what I said was, when the governor said, I want to make sure that the same number of cars go through, I said, that's 80s, 70s, 60s thinking. There ought to be mass transit. What there ought to be is what they have in Curitiba in Brazil. They have mass transit that runs down Aurora and runs through and runs all the way down to the airport. It ought to be a bus transit system or something like that that uses the tunnel rather than just pouring cars through it, in my view.
But you're for the construction of the tunnel?
No, I'm not. I don't care. I really don't care which they do, as long as they're going to have it fall down. And we're going to have a terrible mess in the city. And all my interest has been, and what I talked to 3 mayors in a row on this issue, was let's get a plan and get moving on it. Because you're ultimately going to turn to the feds and say, where's the money? Whatever the city wants for a plan, I'll sell it. You can't be at every level on any issue. I don't care what it is. You have to pick the places where you put your energy and your effort. And I picked the number of them. I haven't picked the tunnel. And if somebody wants a congressman to spend all their time in Washington, D.C. getting the tunnel in this climate, that's another issue that they'll have to go on. Because I'm not going to spend all my time figuring out whether we ought to have a tunnel or not. That is not the #1 issue. The mayor comes into office and says, I don't want to have the city on the hook for any overruns.
let's take that issue right there.
Sure.
Do you agree with Mayor McGinn on that?
That makes sense to me because it's a state issue. I think it ought to be a state highway. I think it should, I think the mayor's right, but that's not the way the legislature decided, and the mayor can stop it. But the question is, when will it happen and how will it happen? And it isn't gonna happen because one congressman comes in and says, listen, you guys.
Well, but you have some clout. I mean, would you suggest that the state legislature remove that provision that tries to put Seattle on the hook for cost overruns next session?
I got enough problems in Washington DC not to be getting down into the weeds on those kinds of issues. The viaduct, I didn't run to fix the viaduct or not fix the viaduct.
But as you say,
If you want somebody to do that, you need somebody else.
But as you say, it may become a federal issue because if there are cost overruns, which is very likely, they'll be turning potentially to the feds to help them with this project. So if you're looking at a project in your district where a lot of people say the odds are very high of there being significant cost overruns, perhaps in the billions, that the state can't afford to pay and the city property owners don't want to pay, which means they're going to be coming to you, Jim McDermott, to say, hey, get the federal government to help us pay. I mean, would you advise them that that's a good strategy? To start a project?
If they ask me. But it's not my job to interfere in their functioning as a functioning legislative body for the city. It's not, I'm just like every other citizen in that sense.
Well, as every other citizen, do you think that we should address this question? Who's going to pay for the cost overruns?
I told you what I thought. I know they're going to come to us for the money when they're short. And they're going to go to the state legislature if they're short. You're making an assumption that it's going to go wrong.
Well, 90% of them do.
Lots of projects do have cost overruns, that's correct. So they're going to come to either us or the state legislature for money. And at that point, we'll get them the money.